Right, so to look back on these arguments and analyze them, Dr. Ina Gouws is a political analyst and joins us now to discuss this. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Let's just start with some of the arguments that were put forth and what was expressed. Justice Stephen Majid, we know, was one of the justices who was not completely sold on the IEC's argument, saying the supply of vaccines outstripped demand as people showed reluctance to get the jab. So do you think now that the 18 and older cohort being open for vaccination will strengthen this line of thinking?
Yes, as you say, there's not just him. I think other justices who wasn't sold on this idea. First of all, because it's argued that the IEC should have woken up a bit quicker, knowing the situation in the country, and made the necessary adjustments to be ready for whatever the situation might be. And the fact that, there is so much of the vaccines and people are reluctant to go, we hope that this new cohort will strengthen that idea. But if it will convince the Constitutional Court to make this decision is an entire another matter. Because for me, the most important question that was asked, which the advocate Trengove, in my opinion, faltered a bit, was, is this situation supposed to be in front of the Constitutional Court? And why isn't it rather, in the hands of Parliament to make this decision?
So the IEC has said in the past that it's more a matter of expediency. They feel that the parliamentary process is going to take time. And there have been political parties, including the Democratic Alliance, who have been critical of this decision, making this the purview or responsibility of the Constitutional Court. But if we're talking about constitutional democracy and health, should it then not be before the Constitutional Court?
Therein lies the question, and that is a difficult question to answer. When you think about what, the Constitution itself as the highest power, it puts a Constitutional Court in a very difficult position to decide to effectively not adhere to these principles. And where amendments get made with regard to the Constitution is in Parliament. That is their function. And the IEC waited a long time, in my opinion, quite some time, to put this case in front of the Constitutional Court. So, time-wise, they made it very difficult for the Constitutional Court to also timelessly deliver their ruling in the end. They say, the IEC, that they are busy going ahead with their arrangements as if the election is going to go forward. But it would seem to me that they are scrambling. And the argument now is it the fault of the IEC, that this is going to be a problem? Must that be a good enough reason to not hold the elections to begin with?
So then let's talk about the practicalities and the realities. So what would be realistic in terms of the situation we're in now, given the fact that there is vaccine hesitancy? We heard Advocate Wim Trengove SC say that experts are predicting that only in February 2022 will there be about 70% of the country's population possibly vaccinated. Is this the realistic viewpoint, given, as I said, vaccine hesitancy?
For me, the question is it possible to still hold the elections safely in these circumstances? And there's lots of arguments that can be made to the effect that it can. Other countries have done it. It's not an impossibility. And maybe that can be also a reason for people to make sure they are vaccinated by the time the elections came about. The argument here seems to be the fairness and freeness of the election, not so much, the fact that it must be held regularly. So I think it is possible to hold the elections. I think it is possible to do so fairly safely with all the regulations. My problem, however, is getting people registered.
Okay. And we'll talk about electoral hygiene in just a moment, but in your view, is there a workable or is there a safe percentage, so to speak, to work from? When we say only 12% of the population is now vaccinated, and meaning only 6% is fully vaccinated, how do we make that value judgment of what is safe, and what would guide that?
Regulations will guide that. Leadership that we have a serious problem with will guide that. And infrastructure will guide that. Great planning will guide that. And all these things are the things that the IEC think they will have great difficulty with in the time frame that is left to them. So the Constitutional Court has all these things to keep in mind while knowing or deciding whether it is their place in the first, in the first place to make this decision instead of Parliament.
So, and this is obviously just speculation, if the Apex Court then kicks it back to the IEC, especially these issues that you're raising, that they're responsibility. So I want to juxtapose these different arguments of the various political parties and their Moseneke Commission's own recommendations. What would the Apex Court then have to keep in mind when analysing the core mandates of the IEC vis-a-vis electoral hygiene, the failures of the IEC and where the country will be, the difficult situation will be placed under if it doesn't make a decision?
Well, they have to decide, first of all, if that is something they should decide on in the first place, whether they should keep in mind or take into account the pandemic and the vaccination percentages to begin with. And then the IEC itself must then decide how they're going to go forward and if there will be enough time to do so. They won't have a choice because it's been called the election. And as I said, again, for me, the most important thing is getting people then registered, because you have to then give that opportunity, because we missed 2 registration weekends, which was also a question asked by the Constitutional Court. They could understand the first one. We was in level 4 lockdown. But the second one was, dubious. Why couldn't we go forward with that? And then the arguments were made, but some parties are, ready to do online registrations and some are not. And again, must we make our decision based on certain parties who don't have the ability, but knew that they had to make a plan in the environment that we find ourselves in? This is not an easy decision. So you have to bring it back to basics, to what the Constitution says and who has the power to make any amendments and on what basis. So
there's been also a very interesting exchange on this, the powers that the Apex Court enjoys, movements, the African Transformation Movement, the Forum for Service Delivery, the DA, have said, for instance, that this is not a decision that the Constitutional Court has the powers to make. Wim Trengove, very interestingly, saying that it would be amending the Constitution as in going to Parliament would be a terrible suggestion and set a bad precedent. One would say that is also quite confusing if you still go to the Constitutional Court, because then there's precedence there. What are your thoughts around this?
Yeah. What was interesting to me is, yes, when that moment came, when the question came, one of the justices say, you saying that the IEC does not want, to change the Constitution, and yet that is what it's asking. It's sort of wrapped, under a veil. So you don't ask it, but yet in the end, that is what we are going to have to do. And again, for me, Advocate Trengove sort of faltered in trying to address that, although he was very adamant that that is not what the IEC needs. The Constitutional Court says, or the Justice says, but if we make this decision, in effect, we will be changing, the Constitution. And we must decide now if that is our place to do so.
In a word, do you think the Constitutional Court will make a decision, and will it be in favour of the IEC, yes or no?
I think they will make a decision. And from what I heard today, I am skeptic that they will find in favor of the IEC.
Thank you so much for your time and insights. Dr. Ina Gouws is a political analyst.